15 years. And all along I was sleeping next to a stranger.
If someone had told me 6 months ago that I'd be standing in my own driveway at 3 in the morning, holding a baseball bat and watching my wife's BMW pull up with another man in the passenger seat, I would have laughed. Heck, I would have bought them a drink and called them creative. But here I was, Paul Heller, 42 years old, risk management specialist for Midwest Insurance, living out every suburban husband's nightmare in high definition. The headlights cut through the darkness like accusations. I could see Marissa's silhouette in the driver's seat, her perfectly styled blonde hair catching the dashboard light. The man beside her leaned over, and even from 50 feet away, I could see them kissing. Not a peck, not a friendly goodbye. The kind of kiss that makes wedding vows burst into flames. I've been suspicious for months. The late nights at client dinners, the new lingerie that never made an appearance in our bedroom, the way she'd started looking at me like I was a piece of furniture she'd grown tired of but couldn't quite afford to replace yet. But seeing it, actually witnessing the betrayal, felt like someone had reached into my chest and rearranged my organs. The passenger door opened and out stepped Trent Boyd. Of course it was Trent, Marissa's cousin, the Golden Boy real estate developer, who'd been sniffing around our marriage like a shark smelling blood in the water. 6'2", perfectly capped teeth, and the kind of arrogant swagger that made me want to introduce his face to my fist. I watched him walk around to her window. They talked for another minute, his hand resting on the roof of her car like he owned it, like he owned her. Finally, he stepped back, and she pulled into our garage. I slipped back into the house through the side door, my heart hammering against my ribs. By the time Marissa came inside, I was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, scrolling through my phone like I'd been there all night. "You're up late," she said, not quite meeting my eyes. Her lipstick was gone, and there was a slight flush to her cheeks that I used to find endearing. "Couldn't sleep?" I replied, keeping my voice steady. "How was dinner with the Hendersons?" She paused at the refrigerator, her back to me. "Fine. Long. You know how Martha gets when she starts talking about her garden?" The lie rolled off her tongue so smoothly it was almost impressive. There was no dinner with the Hendersons. I'd called their house at 9:30 just to check. Martha had answered on the second ring, wondering if everything was okay since it was so late. "That's nice," I said. "Trent doing well?" Another pause, longer this time. "I wouldn't know. Why would you ask about Trent?" "Just curious. Haven't seen him around lately?" She turned around then, studying my face with those green eyes that had once made me forget my own name. "He's busy with some big development project. You know how he is about work?" Oh, I knew how he was about work, all right, especially when the work involved screwing his cousin's husband's wife. "I'm going to bed," she announced, already heading toward the stairs. "Don't stay up too much longer." I listened to her footsteps on the hardwood, then the sound of our bedroom door closing. Our bedroom. When had I started thinking of it as ours instead of mine? Probably around the same time she'd started thinking of it as theirs. I sat in that kitchen until dawn, drinking coffee that had gone cold hours ago and planning my next move. Because there would be a next move. Marissa thought she was playing chess while I was stuck playing checkers. She was about to learn that I'd been studying the board a lot longer than she realized. The first thing I did was call my buddy Alan Rivers. We'd served together in the Army Reserve back in our 20s, and now he ran a small private investigation firm downtown. If anyone could help me document what I already knew, it was Alan. "Paul? Jesus, it's 7 in the morning. Someone better be dead." "Not yet," I said, "but I need your help. Professional help." There was a pause, then Alan's voice came back sharper, more focused. "What's going on?" "Marissa's cheating. With her cousin Trent. I need proof." "Crap, man, I'm sorry." "You sure?" "I caught them last night in my driveway, but I need documentation if this goes to court. Meet me at Murphy's Diner in an hour. And Paul, don't do anything stupid until we talk." I hung up and looked around the kitchen that Marissa had redecorated 3 times in the past 5 years. Each time she'd insisted on more expensive fixtures, better appliances, imported tile, all of it paid for with my salary, while she spent her PR firm income on clothes and spa treatments, and apparently hotel rooms with her cousin. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd spent my entire career assessing risk for other people, calculating the probability of disaster, and I'd completely missed the catastrophe brewing in my own home. Murphy's Diner hadn't changed since 1987, which was exactly why I liked it. Red vinyl booths, coffee that could strip paint, and waitresses who called everyone hun, regardless of age or gender. Alan was already there when I arrived, looking like he'd thrown on yesterday's clothes and forgotten to comb his hair. "You look like heck," he said as I slid into the booth across from him. "Thanks, that's exactly what every man wants to hear when his marriage is imploding." Our waitress, Betty, appeared with coffee before I'd even settled in. She'd been working at Murphy's since the Carter administration and had the supernatural ability to read a customer's caffeine needs from across the room. "The usual?" she asked Alan. "Make it 2, I said, "and keep the coffee coming." Once Betty was gone, Alan leaned forward, his expression serious. "Tell me everything, from the beginning." I laid it out for him. The late nights, the new clothes, the way Marissa had started treating me like a roommate instead of a husband. The phone calls she'd take in another room. The weekend work trips that never seemed to generate any actual business. "And you're sure it's Trent?" Alan asked. "I saw them together, in her car. They weren't discussing real estate." Alan pulled out a small notebook and started writing. "Okay, here's what we're going to do. First, I'm going to run surveillance on both of them, document their meetings, photograph them together, establish a pattern. Second, you're going to act completely normal at home. Don't let on that you know anything. That's going to be harder than it sounds. I know, but if she realizes you're onto her, she might get more careful. Or worse, she might file for divorce first and claim you were controlling or emotionally harmful. Trust me, I've seen it happen." The thought of Marissa painting me as the villain in our story made my stomach turn. But Alan was right. I needed to play this smart. "How long will it take?" I asked. "Give me 2 weeks, maybe 3. I want to build a solid case before we make any moves." Betty returned with our food eggs, bacon, hash browns, and toast that could have been used as roofing material. Comfort food for uncomfortable situations. "There's something else," Alan said, cutting into his eggs. "If this goes to divorce court, you need to be prepared for her to play dirty. Cheaters often try to flip the script, make themselves look like the victim." "What do you mean?" "I mean, she might claim you were neglectful, or emotionally distant, or that the marriage was already over. She might even try to say you drove her to cheat." The idea was so absurd it was almost funny. I'd worked 60-hour weeks for 15 years to give Marissa the lifestyle she wanted. I'd supported her career, her hobbies, her endless parade of expensive whims. If I'd been neglectful of anything, it was my own needs. "Let her try," I said. "I've got 15 years of credit card statements showing exactly who I've been supporting." Alan smiled grimly. "That's the spirit. But remember, this isn't just about money. It's about respect. And from what you're telling me, she stopped respecting you a long time ago." He was right. The signs had been there for months, maybe years. The way she'd roll her eyes when I talked about work. The little comments about my clothes, my hobbies, my friends. Death by 1,000 cuts. So gradual I hadn't noticed I was being worn down. "I want her to pay for this," I said, surprised by the venom in my own voice. "She will, but we're going to do it the right way. Legal, documented, and devastating." I left Murphy's feeling like I had a plan for the first time in months. Alan would handle the investigation while I played the oblivious husband. It wouldn't be easy, but I'd survived worse things than a cheating wife. The hard part was going home and pretending everything was normal. Marissa was in the kitchen when I walked in, dressed for work in a black suit that probably cost more than my monthly car payment. "Where were you?" she asked, not looking up from her phone. "Had breakfast with Alan. We're thinking about starting a poker game." "That's nice." Her tone suggested she found it about as interesting as watching paint dry. I watched her gather her things. Purse, keys, the leather portfolio I'd given her for Christmas 3 years ago. She moved through our house like she was already gone, like she was just going through the motions until she could make her escape official. "What time will you be home tonight?" I asked. "Late. I have a client dinner." Another lie, delivered without even a flicker of guilt. After she left, I walked through the house we'd shared for 8 years, seeing it with new eyes. The wedding photos on the mantel looked like evidence of a crime. The furniture we'd picked out together felt like props in a play that had closed years ago. I found myself in our bedroom, staring at the unmade bed. How many nights had she lain next to me, planning her next meeting with Trent? How many mornings had she kissed me goodbye before going to kiss him hello? My phone buzzed, a text from Alan. "Already on it. Stay strong." I was about to find out just how strong I really was. 3 days into Alan's surveillance operation, the first shoe dropped. Not from his investigation, but from an unexpected source, my so-called friends. I was having lunch at Rossetti's, a little Italian place downtown where I'd been going for years, when I spotted them at a corner table. Mike Thompson, Dave Chen, and Jennifer Walsh, 3 people I'd considered close friends for over a decade. They were huddled together, talking in low voices, and when Jennifer saw me, her face went white. I walked over, trying to keep my expression neutral. "Hey guys, mind if I join you?" The silence that followed was deafening. Mike, who'd been my best man at my wedding, couldn't even look at me. Dave, normally the most talkative person in any room, suddenly found his pasta fascinating. "Actually, Paul," Jennifer said, her voice tight, "we were just finishing up. Funny, your food just arrived." I pulled out the empty chair and sat down anyway. "So what's the big secret? Planning someone's surprise party?" More silence. Then Mike finally looked up, his face flushed with what I initially thought was embarrassment but quickly realized was anger. "We know, Paul," he said quietly. "Know what?" "About Marissa, about what you've been doing to her." The words hit me like a physical blow. "What I've been doing to her?" Jennifer leaned forward, her eyes blazing with righteous indignation. "She told us everything, how controlling you've become, how you've been spying on her, accusing her of things, making her life miserable." I felt the world tilt sideways. "She said what?" "Don't play dumb," Dave finally spoke up. "She showed us the bruises, Paul." "Bruises?" My voice came out as a croak. "On her wrists," Jennifer said. "From where you grabbed her during one of your jealous rages." I stared at them. These people I'd known for years, people I'd trusted with my secrets, my fears, my hopes. They were looking at me like I was a stranger. Worse, like I was a monster. "You actually believe I hit my wife?" I asked. "We believe our friend when she comes to us crying, asking for help," Mike said. "We believe her when she shows us physical evidence of misuse. And we believe her when she tells us she's afraid of what you might do next," Jennifer added. The restaurant suddenly felt too small, too hot. I could feel other diners looking our way, drawn by the tension at our table. This was Marissa's move, I realized. She'd gotten ahead of the story, painted herself as the victim before I could expose her as the cheater. "Has it occurred to any of you that she might be lying?" I asked. "Why would she lie about something like that?" Dave demanded. "Maybe because she's the one having an affair." The words hung in the air like smoke. Jennifer actually gasped, as if I'd confessed to homicide. "That's exactly the kind of paranoid accusation she said you'd make," Mike said, shaking his head. "Jesus, Paul, listen to yourself." "I am listening to myself. The question is, are you listening to me? I've been your friend for 10 years. Have I ever given you any reason to think I'd hurt a woman?" "People change," Jennifer said coldly, "especially when they're losing control of their lives." I looked around the table at these 3 people who'd been part of my inner circle for so long. Mike, who'd helped me move into my first apartment. Dave, who'd been my drinking buddy through my father's death. Jennifer, who'd set me up on blind dates before I met Marissa. "So that's it?" I said. "You're just going to take her word over mine? No questions asked?" "She's our friend too," Mike said, "and she's the one who needs our support right now." What about the Paul who needs support? What about the fact that my marriage is falling apart? "Your marriage is falling apart because you're tearing it apart," Jennifer snapped. "Marissa told us how you've been interrogating her every time she comes home, how you've been checking her phone, following her around, making accusations." Every word was like a knife twist. Marissa had taken the truth and flipped it inside out, turned my justified suspicions into evidence of my instability. "I want you to stay away from us," Dave said quietly. "All of us, until you get some help." "Help for what?" "For whatever's wrong with you that makes you think it's okay to terrorize your wife." I stood up so fast my chair scraped against the floor. Other diners were definitely staring now, probably wondering if they were about to witness a scene. "You know what?" I said, my voice shaking with rage. "You're right about one thing. People do change. I'm just finding out how much." I walked out of Rossetti's feeling like I'd been sucker punched. In one brilliant move, Marissa had isolated me from my support system and established herself as the wronged party. She'd probably been planning this for weeks, maybe months. While I'd been gathering evidence of her affair, she'd been building a case against me. My phone rang as I reached my car. "Alan." "We've got them," he said without preamble. "Hotel meeting yesterday afternoon. I've got photos, timestamps, everything." But Paul, there's something else. Something you need to know. What? She's been meeting with a divorce attorney, filed preliminary papers this morning, and, according to my source at the courthouse, she's claiming domestic misuse. I closed my eyes and leaned against my car. Marissa wasn't just cheating on me. She was destroying me. How long do I have? I asked. She'll probably serve you within the week. But Paul, with these misuse allegations, you need to be very careful. Don't give her any ammunition. Too late for that. She just turned my 3 best friends against me. Then we'd better make sure the evidence speaks louder than her lies. I hung up and sat in my car for a long time, watching people go about their normal lives. Shopping, laughing, solving ordinary problems. I envied them their simple concerns, but I wasn't beaten yet. Marissa thought she was playing chess while I was playing checkers. She was about to learn that I'd been studying the board longer than she realized, and I was very good at calculating risk. The divorce papers arrived on a Thursday morning, delivered by a process server who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. I signed for them at my front door, still wearing my bathrobe, while Mrs. Patterson from next door watched through her kitchen window like she was witnessing a car accident. The allegations were worse than I'd imagined. According to the documents, I was a controlling, emotionally harmful husband who had become increasingly unstable and violent. Marissa was seeking an emergency restraining order, claiming she feared for her safety. She wanted the house, half my retirement savings, and monthly alimony that would have made a lottery winner wince. But the real masterpiece was the personal statement attached to the filing. 3 pages of carefully crafted lies that painted me as a monster and her as a long-suffering victim who had finally found the courage to escape. She described incidents that had never happened, conversations that existed only in her imagination, and a pattern of misuse that would have made a Hollywood screenwriter proud. I was reading this fiction when my phone rang. Alan, tell me you got the papers, he said. I'm looking at them now. She's claiming I threatened to end her if she ever left me. Did you? Of course not. The worst thing I ever said to her was that her meatloaf tasted like cardboard. Well, we're about to find out how creative her memory really is. I've got everything ready for the counterattack. But Paul, this is going to get ugly. Are you prepared for that? I looked around the house that Marissa wanted to take from me, filled with memories of a marriage that had apparently been a lie from day one. I'm prepared. Good, because we're going nuclear. Meet me at my office in an hour. And Paul, bring your sense of humor. You're going to need it. Alan's office was in a converted warehouse downtown, all exposed brick and industrial lighting. He'd laid out his evidence on a conference table like a prosecutor preparing for trial. Photos, documents, timeline charts, and a laptop displaying what looked like a surveillance video. Feast your eyes on this, he said, hitting play on the video. The footage showed the parking lot of the Marriott downtown. I watched Marissa's BMW pull into a space, followed 30 seconds later by Trent's silver Porsche. They met between the cars, and what happened next left no doubt about the nature of their relationship. The kiss lasted almost a full minute, hands roaming places that definitely violated the cousin relationship they claimed to have. I've got 6 different meetings documented, Alan said. Hotels, restaurants, even his condo when his wife was out of town. But this is the crown jewel. He clicked to another video. This one clearly shot through a hotel room window from the building across the street. I recognized Trent immediately, and the woman with him was definitely Marissa. They weren't discussing real estate. How did you get this? I asked. Let's just say I have friends in the security business. The point is, we can prove she's been lying about everything. The affair, the misuse allegations, all of it. I studied the photos spread across the table. Marissa and Trent at dinner, holding hands across the table. Entering his condo together, kissing in the parking garage of her office building. The evidence was overwhelming. So, what's our next move? I asked. Alan smiled, and there was something predatory in his expression. We're going to give her exactly what she wants, a public hearing where she can tell her story about what a terrible husband you are, except we're going to be there with visual aids. The hearing was scheduled for the following Tuesday. Marissa's attorney, a shark named Patricia Kellerman, who specialized in high-conflict divorces, had requested an expedited hearing based on the alleged domestic violence. She wanted the restraining order approved and temporary custody of our assets established before I could hide or destroy marital property. I spent the weekend preparing my defense, working with Alan to organize the evidence and plan our presentation. We decided to let Marissa tell her story first, give her enough rope to hang herself with her own lies, then systematically destroy every claim she'd made. Tuesday morning arrived gray and cold, matching my mood perfectly. I met Alan at the courthouse, both of us dressed in our best suits and carrying briefcases full of truth. Marissa was already there with her attorney, wearing a conservative blue dress and just enough makeup to look vulnerable but not vain. She'd even styled her hair differently, softer and more innocent than her usual power woman look. When she saw me, she actually flinched, like she was afraid I might attack her right there in the hallway. The performance was Oscar-worthy. "Mr. Heller," Patricia Kellerman approached us with the kind of smile sharks probably wore before they bit. "I hope you're prepared to do the right thing today. My client has suffered enough." "Oh, we're prepared," Alan said pleasantly. "Very prepared." The hearing room was smaller than I'd expected, more like a large office than a courtroom. Judge Margaret Chen presided from behind a wooden desk, looking like she'd heard every sob story and lie the legal system had to offer. "This is a hearing on Mrs. Heller's request for an emergency restraining order and temporary custody of marital assets," Judge Chen announced. "Mrs. Heller, you may present your case." What followed was a masterclass in manipulation. Marissa took the witness chair and delivered a performance that would have made Meryl Streep jealous. She spoke in a quiet, trembling voice about years of emotional misuse that had gradually escalated to physical violence. She described a controlling husband who monitored her every move, accused her of imaginary affairs, and threatened her when she tried to assert any independence. "He told me that if I ever tried to leave him, he would make sure I lost everything," she said, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. "He said he would destroy my reputation, my career, everything I'd worked for." Judge Chen listened with the kind of neutral expression that revealed nothing. Kellerman guided Marissa through her testimony with leading questions designed to paint the most damaging picture possible. "And did there come a time when Mr. Heller's behavior became physical?" Kellerman asked. "Yes," Marissa whispered. "Last month, when I came home late from a work dinner, he grabbed my wrists and shook me. He was screaming about how I was making him look like a fool." She rolled up her sleeves to show faded bruises on her wrists. They looked real enough, though I had no idea how she'd gotten them. Maybe Trent had been rougher than expected during one of their hotel encounters. "I was terrified," she continued. "That's when I realized I had to get out before something worse happened." By the time she finished, I almost believed her myself. She'd taken every legitimate concern I'd raised about her behavior and twisted it into evidence of my instability. She'd turned my investigation into stalking, my questions into interrogations, my hurt into rage. "Your witness," Kellerman said, looking smugly confident. Alan stood up, and I could see Judge Chen preparing for the usual cross-examination, probably expecting him to attack Marissa's credibility or poke holes in her timeline. Instead, he walked over to his laptop and connected it to the room's display screen. "Mrs. Heller," he said conversationally, "you testified that your husband has been accusing you of having an affair. Is that correct?" "Yes, his paranoid jealousy has been destroying our marriage." "And you've denied having an affair?" "Of course I have, because it's not true." Alan nodded sympathetically. "That must have been very frustrating being accused of something you weren't doing. It was horrible. He made me feel like a prisoner in my own home." "I see. And you mentioned that you've been working late frequently, attending client dinners and business meetings?" "Yes, my career is very important to me." "Of course. And your cousin Trent, you two have a close relationship?" For the first time, I saw a flicker of uncertainty in Marissa's eyes. "We're family. We've always been close." "Close enough that you meet him regularly for lunch and drinks?" "Sometimes, when our schedules allow." Alan clicked his laptop, and the screen filled with a photo of Marissa and Trent at a restaurant, their hands intertwined across the table, looking at each other with expressions that had nothing to do with family affection. The silence in the room was deafening. "Mrs. Heller," Alan continued, his voice still conversational, "is this you and your cousin having a family lunch?" Marissa stared at the screen, her face cycling through confusion, recognition, and panic. That's not... The angle makes it look... "Makes it look like what, Mrs. Heller?" Click. Another photo. This one showed them kissing in the parking lot of the Marriott. "How about this one? Does the angle make this look like something it's not?" Kellerman was on her feet. "Objection! This is clearly some kind of setup, doctored photos designed to..." "The photos are time-stamped and authenticated," Alan interrupted. "I have the original surveillance footage if the court would like to review it." Judge Chen leaned forward, studying the images on the screen. I'd like to see that footage. What happened next was the most satisfying moment of my adult life. Alan played the surveillance videos in chronological order, building a case that demolished every lie Marissa had told. The hotel meetings, the intimate dinners, the passionate embraces in parking lots, it was all there, documented in high definition. With each new piece of evidence, Marissa seemed to shrink in her chair. The confident victim became a trapped liar, caught in a web of her own deception. Mrs. Heller, Judge Chen said when the videos finished, do you have any explanation for this evidence? Marissa looked at her attorney, who was frantically shuffling through papers like she might find a miracle defense hidden in her briefcase. When no help came, Marissa tried one last desperate play. He forced me into it, she stammered. Paul was so controlling, so emotionally harmful that I sought comfort elsewhere. Trent was helping me plan my escape. It was pathetic, and everyone in the room knew it. Alan wasn't finished. Your Honor, I'd like to present evidence regarding Mrs. Heller's claims of physical misuse. He pulled out a folder and handed copies to the judge and Kellerman. These are medical records from Dr. Sarah Martinez, Mrs. Heller's personal physician. As you can see, Mrs. Heller has been treated 3 times in the past 6 months for injuries consistent with intense physical intimacy. The dates correspond exactly with her documented meetings with Mr. Boyd. Judge Chen reviewed the documents, her expression growing colder by the minute. So the bruises you claim were caused by your husband were actually caused by her lover, Alan finished. Mrs. Heller has fabricated every allegation of misuse in this petition. The hearing ended with Judge Chen denying the restraining order and scheduling a full divorce proceeding for the following month. As we gathered our materials, Marissa sat frozen in her chair, staring at the table like she couldn't believe what had just happened. Mrs. Heller, Judge Chen said before dismissing us, I want to make something very clear. Filing false allegations of domestic violence is a serious matter. I'm referring this case to the district attorney's office for review. Outside the courthouse, Alan and I stood in the cold morning air, watching Marissa and her attorney hurry toward their car. Think she'll face charges? I asked. Probably not, but her reputation is shot, and word travels fast in legal circles. Kellerman won't want to be associated with this kind of case again. I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and sadness. I'd won this battle, but my marriage was still over, and 15 years of my life had been revealed as an elaborate lie. So what happens now? I asked. Alan grinned. Now we prepare for the main event. Because if you think she's going to go quietly after this humiliation, you don't know women as well as I thought you did. He was right. Marissa wasn't done with me yet, but I wasn't done with her either. The real war was just beginning. The full divorce hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks later, which gave both sides time to prepare for what promised to be a brutal legal battle. Marissa's humiliation at the restraining order hearing had made the local legal community gossip mill, and she was now represented by a different attorney, a bulldog named Robert Crane, who specialized in salvaging hopeless cases. But I had bigger problems than Marissa's new legal strategy. The fallout from the hearing had spread beyond the courthouse, and the collateral damage was mounting. My employer, Midwest Insurance, called me into a meeting 2 days after the hearing. The company's HR director, a nervous man named Gary Walsh, sat across from me in a conference room that smelled like stale coffee and broken dreams. Paul, we need to discuss your situation, he said, avoiding eye contact. What situation is that, Gary? The domestic violence allegations. Even though they were dismissed, there's been talk, clients asking questions, the company image to consider. I stared at him across the polished table. You're firing me because my wife lied about me in court. We're not firing you. We're suggesting you might want to take some time off. Let things settle down. Unpaid time off. Well, yes. I'd worked for Midwest Insurance for 12 years. I'd saved them millions of dollars by accurately assessing risks and preventing bad investments. I'd missed family dinners, vacations, and my own birthday parties to handle emergencies for this company. And now they were throwing me under the bus because my wife was a sociopathic liar. How much time off are we talking about? I asked. Until after your divorce is finalized. Maybe longer, depending on how things go. I stood up and straightened my tie. Gary, I've got one thing to say to you. He looked up hopefully, probably expecting me to thank him for his understanding. Get lost. I walked out of that conference room and straight to my office, where I spent the next hour copying files and contact information to a flash drive. If Midwest Insurance wanted to abandon me, I'd return the favor. Some of their biggest clients had been asking me for years to go independent. Maybe it was time to take them up on those offers. But my employment troubles were nothing compared to what happened next. I was having lunch at Murphy's Diner, one of the few places I could still eat without running into former friends, when Jennifer Walsh walked in. She spotted me immediately, and I could see her debating whether to leave or confront me. She chose confrontation. "I heard about the hearing," she said, sliding into the booth across from me uninvited. "Did you now?" "The whole thing was a setup, wasn't it? You hired someone to follow her around, take compromising photos?" I set down my sandwich and looked at her. Jennifer had been one of my closest friends for 8 years. She'd been a bridesmaid at my wedding, godmother to the daughter Marissa and I never had, a regular at our dinner parties and holiday celebrations. "You think I fabricated evidence of my wife's affair?" I asked. "I think you were so determined to prove you were right that you made it look worse than it was. Maybe she did have lunch with Trent a few times. Maybe they were close, but that doesn't mean she was cheating." "Jennifer, I watched them have love through a hotel window." She flinched like I'd slapped her. "That's disgusting. Even if it's true, spying on people like that is sick. What's sick is believing your friend is a wife-beater without asking for proof. She showed us the bruises. From her lover, not from me." Jennifer's face was flushed with anger and embarrassment. She'd chosen sides based on Marissa's lies, and now she was too proud to admit she'd been wrong. "You've changed, Paul," she said, standing up. "The man I used to know would never have done something like this." "You're right," I replied. "The man you used to know would have let his wife destroy him rather than fight back. Aren't you lucky that man is gone?" She walked out without another word, leaving me alone with my sandwich and the growing realization that this war with Marissa was going to cost me everything I'd built over the past 15 years. My job, my friends, my reputation, all of it was collateral damage in her campaign of destruction. But if she thought I was going to roll over and die, she'd seriously miscalculated. That evening, I met Alan at his office to plan our strategy for the divorce hearing. He'd been busy gathering additional evidence, and the conference table was covered with documents, photos, and financial records. "I've got some interesting news about your wife's boyfriend," he said, pulling out a thick folder. "Turns out Trent Boyd isn't quite the successful businessman he pretends to be." "What do you mean?" "I mean his real estate empire is built on quicksand. He's leveraged to the eyeballs, behind on multiple loans, and facing foreclosure on 3 properties. The Porsche is leased, the fancy clothes are bought on credit, and he's been juggling creditors for months." This was unexpected. Trent had always presented himself as wildly successful, the kind of man who made deals worth millions and never worried about money. "So, what's he after?" I asked. "Your wife's money, and yours by extension. Think about it. Marissa makes good money at her PR firm, and you've got a solid retirement account, equity in the house, savings. To a guy facing bankruptcy, she looks like a life preserver." The pieces were starting to fit together. Trent hadn't seduced Marissa because he was madly in love with her. He'd targeted her because she represented financial salvation. "There's more," Alan continued. "I did some digging into Trent's background. This isn't his first time playing this game. He had an affair with a married woman in Chicago 3 years ago. She left her husband, married Trent, and within 6 months he'd cleaned out her accounts and disappeared. She's still paying off the debts he left behind." I stared at the documents spread across the table. "Does Marissa know any of this?" "I doubt it. She's probably as much a victim as you are in her own way. The difference is, she chose to handle it by destroying your life instead of facing the truth." "So what do we do with this information?" Alan smiled. "We give Trent exactly what he deserves, and we make sure Marissa understands what kind of man she threw away her marriage for." The plan we hatched that night was beautiful in its simplicity. Instead of just defending against Marissa's lies, we were going to expose the truth about her affair and destroy Trent's credibility in the process. By the time we were finished, everyone would understand exactly who the real victims were. The divorce hearing was held in the same courthouse where Marissa had tried to destroy me with her restraining order. This time, the room was packed with spectators, lawyers, court reporters, and various hangers-on who'd heard about the case and wanted to see the fireworks. Marissa's new attorney, Robert Crane, was a different animal than Patricia Kellerman. Where Kellerman had been sleek and manipulative, Crane was blunt and aggressive. He opened by acknowledging that his client had made mistakes, but argued that my behavior had driven her to them. Mr. Heller may not have physically harmed his wife, Crane told the judge, but emotional mistreatment can be just as damaging. My client was trapped in a loveless marriage with a man who controlled every aspect of her life. When she finally found someone who treated her with kindness and respect, she made the very human decision to seek comfort in that relationship. It was a more sophisticated defense than the outright lies Marissa had tried before, but it was still fundamentally dishonest. She hadn't been trapped or controlled. She'd been bored and selfish. Crane called several witnesses to testify about my controlling behavior. Mike Thompson took the stand and described how I'd become obsessed with my wife's activities, constantly questioning her whereabouts and accusing her of infidelity. He was like a different person, Mike said, paranoid, angry, suspicious of everything. It was uncomfortable to be around him. Dave Chen followed with similar testimony, painting me as a jealous husband who'd driven his wife away with my unreasonable demands and accusations. When it was our turn, Alan called me to the stand first. I told my story simply and honestly, a husband who'd noticed his wife pulling away, investigated his suspicions, and discovered a systematic campaign of deception and betrayal. "Did you ever physically misuse your wife?" Alan asked. "Never. Not once in 15 years of marriage." "Did you control her activities or limit her freedom in any way?" "No. She had her own career, her own friends, her own bank account. She came and went as she pleased." "Then why do you think she's made these allegations against you?" I looked across the courtroom at Marissa, who was staring at her hands, because she needed to justify what she'd done. It's easier to believe you're escaping a harmful relationship than to admit you're just a cheater. Then Alan called his surprise witness, Patricia Morrison, the woman from Chicago who'd been Trent's previous victim. She was in her 50s, well-dressed and articulate, and she told a story that was eerily similar to what was happening to me. "He was charming, successful, everything my husband wasn't," she testified. "He made me feel special, desired, alive again. I left my marriage for him, and within months he'd emptied my accounts and moved on to his next target." The courtroom was dead silent as she described how Trent had systematically isolated her from her support system, convinced her that her husband was holding her back, and manipulated her into believing that leaving her marriage was an act of liberation rather than betrayal. "Has Mr. Boyd contacted you recently?" Alan asked. "Yes. 2 weeks ago he called and offered me money to testify that Paul Heller had threatened him. When I refused, he suggested that it would be unfortunate if my current employer learned about my unstable past." Judge Chen looked like she was ready to hold Trent in contempt, but he wasn't in the courtroom. According to Alan's sources, he'd left town the day after our private investigator had visited his office with questions about his Chicago activities. The final witness was Dr. Martinez, Marissa's physician, who testified about the injuries she'd treated and their likely causes. Her clinical description of physically intense, intimate encounters left no doubt about how Marissa had gotten the bruises she'd tried to blame on me. By the time Alan finished presenting our case, Marissa looked like she wanted to disappear through the floor. Her grand romance had been exposed as a con game, her lover had been revealed as a serial predator, and her allegations against me had been thoroughly debunked. Judge Chen took less than an hour to render her decision. The divorce was granted, but on terms that were far different from what Marissa had demanded. She got half the equity in our house, but I got to keep my retirement account and savings. She got no alimony, and I got a judgment against her for the legal fees I'd incurred defending against her false allegations. "Mrs. Heller," Judge Chen said in closing, "I want you to understand that your actions in this case have been reprehensible. You have wasted this court's time, damaged your husband's reputation, and potentially prevented real victims of domestic violence from being believed. If I could award Mr. Heller additional damages for the harm you've caused, I would." As we left the courthouse, I felt a strange mix of victory and emptiness. I'd won, but what exactly had I won? A divorce from a woman I'd once loved, validation that I wasn't the monster she'd painted me as, and the right to start over at 42 with half my assets and no friends. "How does it feel?" Alan asked as we walked to our cars. "Like I survived a war but lost everything I was fighting for." "Not everything. You've got your integrity, your self-respect, and the knowledge that you didn't let her destroy you." He was right, but it didn't feel like enough. I'd spent 15 years building a life that had turned out to be an illusion. Now I had to figure out what came next. But first, I had one more piece of business to handle. I drove to Marissa's apartment that evening, a modest place she'd rented after moving out of our house. She answered the door looking older than I'd ever seen her, wearing sweatpants and an old t-shirt, her hair pulled back in a ponytail. "What do you want, Paul?" "To ask you a question. Just one." She sighed and stepped aside to let me in. The apartment was barely furnished, boxes still stacked in corners like she hadn't decided whether this was temporary or permanent. "Was any of it real?" I asked. "The first few years, the honeymoon period, the plans we made? Was I married to you or to an act?" She sat down on her couch and was quiet for a long time. When she finally looked up, there were tears in her eyes. "It was real at first," she said quietly. "I did love you. But somewhere along the way, I started feeling trapped. Not by you, but by the life we'd built. The routine, the predictability, the feeling that I was disappearing into someone else's idea of what I should be. So you decided to blow it all up instead of talking to me about it. I decided to find something that made me feel alive again. And when Trent came along, he made me feel like the woman I used to be before I became half of a couple. And when that fell apart, you decided to destroy me, rather than take responsibility for your choices." She nodded, not bothering to deny it. "I was scared, ashamed. I knew what people would think of me if they knew the truth, so I tried to make you the villain instead. It almost worked. I know. I'm sorry, Paul. I'm sorrier than you'll ever know." I looked around her sad little apartment, at this woman who'd been the center of my world for 15 years, and felt something I hadn't expected. Pity. "What will you do now?" I asked. "I don't know. Start over, I guess. Try to figure out who I am when I'm not lying to everyone around me." I stood up to leave, then turned back one more time. "For what it's worth, Marissa, you didn't need to destroy our marriage to find yourself. You just needed to be honest about what you wanted. I would have listened." "I know," she said. "That's what makes this so much worse." I left her there in her half-empty apartment and drove home to my half-empty house. Tomorrow I would start rebuilding my life, finding new clients, making new friends, creating a future that didn't depend on anyone else's lies. It wouldn't be easy, but it would be honest. And after everything I'd been through, honesty felt like the most valuable thing in the world. 6 months later, I was having lunch at Murphy's Diner when Jennifer Walsh walked in. This time she came straight to my table. "I owe you an apology," she said, sitting down across from me. "Yes, you do." I heard what really happened. About Trent, about the money, about all of it. I should have believed you from the beginning. "Why didn't you?" She was quiet for a moment, stirring sugar into her coffee. "Because it was easier to believe Marissa was a victim than to admit we'd all been fooled by her for years. And because you were always so steady, so reliable. It was hard to imagine you as someone who needed defending. Everyone needs defending sometimes." "I know that now. I'm sorry, Paul. Really sorry. I looked at this woman who'd been one of my closest friends, who'd abandoned me when I needed her most, and who was now asking for forgiveness. A year ago, I would have welcomed her back with open arms, grateful for any connection to my old life. But I wasn't the same man I'd been a year ago. "I accept your apology," I said. "But I don't forgive you. Some things can't be undone, Jennifer. Some betrayals are too deep." She nodded, tears in her eyes. "I understand." After she left, I sat in that diner for a long time, thinking about forgiveness and friendship and the price of loyalty. I'd learned a lot about people in the past year, most of it disappointing. But I'd also learned about myself, and that knowledge was worth more than all the friends I'd lost. My phone buzzed with a text from Alan. "New client wants to meet. Big case. You interested?" I smiled and typed back, "Always." Then I paid my check and walked out into the bright afternoon sun, ready for whatever came next.